Amazing transformation. How a lazy boy discovered the hidden power of 7 simple habits to change his life. Jake lounged deep into the couch cushions of his grandparents' home, fingers flicking the joystick of his game controller but never fully immersed. Outside, the faint sounds of summer life droned on, casualties of his languor. It was always like this, all charm, all ease, gliding by on the remnants of his family's reputation. But the memories of his grandfather's diligent mornings echoed in his mind like distant thunder, a constant reminder of the legacy he was failing to uphold. Today, his fingers gave way to guilt as he recalled the empty shop in the town's heart, a monument of dreams abandoned. The wooden facade was rotting, barricaded by weeds stubbornly asserting their claim. Responsibility tugged at his insides, a knot tightening every time he took a breath. He should be out there, doing something, anything. But all he felt was the lull of the screen before him, the explosions of digital enemies drowning out the low whispers of his conscience. Stumbling into the attic during a moment of idle distraction, Jake rifled through dust-coated boxes, tossing aside discarded relics and fading memories. That's when he spotted it, an ancient journal, its spine cracked but the ink strangely vibrant against the yellowed pages. His grandfather's handwriting sprawled across the surface, a map of determination and uphill battles. 7 simple habits, it declared boldly. With each flip of the page, Jake felt an ember stir within him. Perhaps this was the ignition he needed. But could he truly forge a new path? As he lumbered over the first of those habits, waking up early, the chaos of internal doubts ricocheted in his head. What if he failed? What if his friends laughed at him? Finding himself at a crossroads of newfound ambition and the tempest of skepticism from those around him only deepened the chasm of dread in his stomach. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. Days turned into weeks as Jake attempted to embody the man his grandfather had envisioned. He reached out to help a neighbor, volunteered to clean the empty shop. But when his friends took jabs, mocking him for trading in their escapades for sweat and purpose, a fissure began to fracture his resolve. Each look of pity or ribbing ignited a flicker of anger beneath his skin, battling the shame. Then the floor fell out beneath him. A pang. A betrayal struck when a close friend, the one he had confided in about this newfound journey, snickered behind his back. It crushed him, not just the laughter, but the realization that loyalty wasn't always reciprocal. The weight felt heavier than the expectations from his grandfather's name. He was tethered to a past that seemed to mock his efforts. Emotions surged as he silently weighed his desires for acceptance against his yearning for self-discovery. The journal's truths became a blur as self-doubt clawed at him, bringing with it an uncomfortable whisper. Was he moving forward or spiraling backward? Clenching the journal, Jake realized he stood on the precipice. Could he muster the courage to confront his friends, to stand tall in the face of derision? Or would he silence his ambitions, content to mold himself into what they expected? The questions folded into a gripping uncertainty, the very core of who he was destabilizing with every thought. Jake palmed the paper, the ink blurring under his fingertips, wondering, could he create his legacy, unraveling what it means to be both grounded in his family spirit and liberated from their expectations? As the air in the room thickened with anticipation, Jake steeled himself, prepared for the storm brewing within and the decision that could redefine everything he thought he knew. He was stuck in a tug of war with himself, the stakes higher than ever. Days turned into restless nights, plagued by thoughts of inadequacy and failure. The journal had ignited a flicker of hope, but it was tempered by the weight of disapproval hanging over him like a storm cloud. The next morning, a new sense of resolve sparked as the sun cut through the window, awakening more than just his body. He sat at the kitchen table, the journal laid before him, pages trembling under the weight of his aspirations. This time, he would not simply mimic the habits, he would adopt them as a new identity. Determination fueled him as he committed to strategies that felt daunting yet thrilling. Jake's first act was to wake up an hour earlier each day. He reasoned it might help him seize control of his mornings, a battle he had long lost to lethargy. The first few days were brutal. His body fought against it with all its might, heavy-lidded and slow. But he pushed through, spurred by a fraying sense of purpose. On a Tuesday, with bleary eyes, he found himself on the porch, cradling a cup of coffee he was not entirely sure he should drink. Yet, as the caffeine unfurling its warmth coursed through him, clarity settled. With each passing day, Jake sought opportunities to refine other habits, reading more, exercising, setting small daily goals. Each struggle turned into a lesson learned, a puzzle piecing together a new version of himself. He discovered a sense of fulfillment in little victories. Finishing a chapter of a book felt monumental, and completing a jog around the block spurred an unfamiliar sense of pride. Yet, in the shadow of this burgeoning self-improvement, doubt stripped the enthusiasm from his gains. Jake avoided his friends, fearing their derision if they witnessed his metamorphosis. Social media became a minefield of comparisons. Images of carefree gatherings pierced his heart like reality checks. The loneliness, previously ignored, crept in with a newfound intensity. One evening, he opened a window to the void, a digital scroll filled with insignificant updates from his peers. That's when his phone buzzed with a message. His old friend, Mark, an unyielding critic from his past, reached out. "Hey man, what happened to you? Why don't you come hang out anymore?" It felt accusative, the text like salt on an open wound. The question bounced around in his head like a ping-pong ball while he wrestled with his defenses. Did he want to explain himself? To share the profound changes he was going through? To reveal the aspirations blooming in his heart? Or was it easier to accept the easy comfort of being a lazy boy, the identity once so accessible to him? In a moment of clarity, Jake knew he had to confront Mark. Not just every jab or snicker he had endured, but the doubt that held him captive. The stakes were no longer merely personal, they were existential. Summoning courage, he typed out a response. It began as a hesitant explanation, but transformed into an expression of his journey, the struggles and ambitions mapped onto the screen. Would Mark understand? Even as his finger hovered over the send button, he understood that pressing it would be akin to throwing himself into the arena, exposing his most vulnerable self. But growth demanded vulnerability, the kind that could dislodge the self-doubt clinging to him. With one last deep breath, he pressed send. Did he just initiate a dialogue that could redefine not only his friendships, but also his trajectory? Jake stood at a crossroads, feeling a mixture of exhilaration and dread wash over him. The decision had been made, but what was the outcome? Was he brave enough to face the ramifications not just of his message, but of the life-changing journey he had embarked on? The air thickened with anticipation as he awaited a reply, standing on the brink of transformation with trembling hope. What awaited him now? The chirp of the notification pierced the silence, yanking Jake from his reverie. He stared at the screen, heart racing, as anxiety surged through him. Was Mark about to dismiss his journey, or could this be a moment of unexpected connection? Before he could overthink it, the message revealed itself. "Glad to hear from you. It's different. I didn't know you were going through all this. Want to talk?" A wave of relief washed over Jake, but it was quickly undercut by a creeping doubt. What if he wasn't articulate enough to communicate the depth of his transformation? He had been so absorbed in his internal struggle that the thought of sharing it openly felt terrifying, like exposing a fragile wound. Insecurities bubbled up. Perhaps he was fooling himself believing in this reformed version. Still, he accepted the opportunity for connection, suggesting they meet at a downtown cafe. As the hours ticked down, he grappled with both excitement and apprehension. What would he say? Would he even recognize the boy who had once been paralyzed by fear and lethargy in the man he was becoming? Jake arrived at the cafe, heart pounding as he took in the atmosphere. Cheerful chatter, the clinking of cups, a sharp contrast to the turmoil inside him. He found a corner table, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm against the wood. Every lapse into memory felt like a reckoning with his past self. He could still hear the laughter of friends who often label him as stuck, a tagline that had haunted him for too long. When Mark walked in, he looked different, less confrontational, maybe even a little reflective. They exchanged greetings, and as Mark settled into his seat, Jake felt the weight of the moment crash over him. It would be a dialogue not just about the past, but an exploration of the man he aspired to be. "Tell me more about these changes," Mark opened cautiously, his tone perhaps softer than Jake remembered. It wasn't an interrogation, but an invitation. How easy it would be to deflect, to share nothing beyond surface-level pleasantries, but Jake recognized that he was at a crucial junction. This was his chance to weave honesty into the conversation. Taking a deep breath, Jake launched into an explanation of why he withdrew from their friendship. He spoke of the early mornings, of poring over his journal, of finding purpose through small victories. Each word dripped with vulnerability, an unmasking of the fear that had tightly gripped him. Mark listened intently, not interrupting, and Jake could see a flicker of something in his eyes, curiosity or possibly regret. As he shared stories about the discomfort associated with growth, the camaraderie embedded in his solitary workouts, Jake began to feel lighter, as if unburdening his past was lifting a weight that had long sat on his shoulders. "Man, I had no idea," Mark finally replied, his voice earnest. "I thought you were just disappearing on us." The words echoed in Jake's mind, mingling with the self-reproach that had shadowed him for too long. "I wish you'd said something. I'd like you to hang out again, but the you are becoming, not the old version." This was a pivotal moment. Jake felt the familiar tightness of doubt swirl inside him, but alongside it was a recognition of potential. A friend who not only saw the change, but could also support it, formed a lifeline stretching into the uncertainty of the future. As they talked more, Jake found himself tapping into unexpected reservoirs of insight, realizing that he had much to offer even as he sought personal growth. He was not merely a fledgling version of himself, he was someone brave enough to confront the cracks and flaws in both himself and his relationships, someone with the power to redefine the threads of his existence. By the end of the conversation, they both stepped into the light outside, words of renewal swirling in the air. It became clear to Jake, his comeback wasn't just about isolation, it was about rebuilding connections firmly rooted in honesty. Every step with Mark began to feel like forging a path not only toward friendship, but also toward an encouraging future. But as he walked away, a gnawing thought lingered. Would others react similarly if Jake began to share his newfound beliefs, or would they remain the same skeptics he once knew? The trust that had been built in that cafe felt fragile, and Jake wondered if he was really prepared for the scrutiny his transformation might invite. The stakes were rising, and he hesitated. Was he ready to confront the wider world with his new identity? Jake now stood on a threshold that promised growth, not just personally, but universally. A chance to explore what depth could look like outside his small circle. Could vulnerability with his entire social world push him even further into his evolution? The afternoon sun filtered through the trees as Jake meandered through the park, grappling with the whirlwind of thoughts ignited by his conversation with Mark. Each step felt heavier, laden with the weight of possibility and the burden of self-doubt. Who was he becoming? More importantly, who would he still be in the eyes of others? He found a bench and sat down, letting the gentle rustling of leaves ground him. He pulled out his journal, a familiar companion that had witnessed his most vulnerable thoughts. The inviting blank pages seemed daunting, a reminder that the next chapter of his life relied on his choice to fill them. There was a stirring urge within him to explore this vulnerability further, to challenge the defensive barriers he'd built around his growth. He started writing about his conversation with Mark, wanting to capture the essence of that moment, the honesty, the shared reflections, the camaraderie of understanding. As he wrote, he realized he was no longer the person scrambling for validation. There was a distinction forming in his mind, a desire to nurture connections based on who he was becoming, not who he was expected to be. Every line birthed new realizations about the habits he had adopted. The early morning runs, the meditative stillness of journaling, even the moments spent cooking healthy meals. They weren't just steps toward fitness or mental clarity, they were affirmations of his commitment to self-growth. This realization ignited a spark within him, a wish to share these changes, not just the transformation itself, but the underlying principles that fueled it. What if he actively engaged others, opening the door to discussions he hadn't dared to before? Jake had often thought of himself as an underachiever, but what if he reframed that narrative? Could he become a source of inspiration for others navigating similar paths of uncertainty? With every word he poured out, he felt the embers of newfound purpose begin to glow brighter. One of the new habits he had embraced was learning. He had succumbed to the binge-worthy allure of motivational podcasts and self-help books. His mind buzzed with ideas and strategies that resonated with him deeply. It was time to distill this knowledge, share it not only with Mark, but perhaps with a wider circle. He envisioned creating a blog, a platform to vocalize his journey, thoughts, and the intricacies of adopting new habits. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. Would his reflections resonate with people? Was he ready to expose his journey to the public eye? Doubts crept back in, but he quashed them down systematically, reminding himself of the power in vulnerability that had emerged during his talk with Mark. He realized this could be a litmus test. Confronting both acceptance and criticism along the way would only deepen his growth. He could no longer control how others perceived him, but he could control how he responded to their perspectives. Therein lay an opportunity, a stage on which he could illuminate his evolution, fostering connections that were grounded in authenticity. Determined, Jake closed his journal and glanced around the park, feeling the urgency of his decision coalesce in the warm air. Today would not just be a day of reflection, it would mark the inception of something greater. As he turned to leave, a sudden thought struck him with the force of a tidal wave. Would his closest friends understand the new narrative he wished to write? Would they celebrate his self-discovery or challenge him, forcing him into the shadows of their previous impressions? The lines of uncertainty twisted painfully in his chest. It was time to take a leap. But could his vulnerability with others become his greatest strength or trigger a confrontation he wasn't prepared to face? Would revealing his new identity be a means of liberation or an invitation for rejection? With those weighty questions echoing in his mind, he moved forward, ready to unveil this next chapter, but the road ahead remained shrouded in mystery. The following morning was draped in mist, the world outside Jake's window resembling a canvas of grays. As dawn struggled to break forth, Jake found himself caught in a familiar cycle of indecision. After last night's revelations, he had scarcely slept, his thoughts a tempest brewing within. The new blog, his mission, loomed over him like an unanswered question. He sat on the edge of his bed, grappling with a piercing fear that had rooted itself in his mind. What if no one cared? A sliver of sunlight broke through the clouds, cascading onto his bedroom wall as he pulled out his phone. Scrolling through the inspirational quotes he'd saved, he paused at a particularly striking one. Your story is what you have, what you will always have. It is something to own. Jake breathed in deeply. Real. Ownership wasn't just about writing, but about sharing, connecting, revealing. He was on the threshold of something transformative, not just for himself, but for others who might resonate with his experiences. With a newfound determination, he grabbed his journal, committing to confront his doubts head-on. Each entry had been a building block, reinforcing the foundation of his narrative. Today, he would draft his introductory post, an invitation into his life, a blueprint of change. The words flowed hesitantly at first, but as he continued, the fog around his identity began to clear. He wrote about the underbelly of self-doubt he had always known, and the zephyr of ambition beginning to stir within him. But the deeper he delved into vulnerability, the more aware he became of his surrounding noise. Images of family and friends filled his mind. What would be their response? Would they embrace who he was becoming, or would they trap him in the echo of his past? A moment of reckoning served as a catalyst, shaping his next words. This journey is not just about fitness or habits, it's about discovering authenticity amidst preconceived notions. He contemplated the risk of forging his path as the specter of judgment loomed. But as he penned those thoughts, a surge of clarity washed over him. His awakening was a testament to resilience, a testament he could share. Just as he began to gather momentum, another thought pierced through, halting his flow. What about Mark? The authenticity they had shared weighed heavily on Jake. He needed to discuss his goals with Mark, outline the blog's purpose, refine his vision, and maybe, just maybe, let him see how much his own journey had been influenced by the spark of their conversation. If he couldn't share this with his closest friend, how could he expect the world to accept him? With resolve, Jake resolved to call Mark later that day. But first, finishing the blog post was essential. He envisioned a community built on shared growth, where vulnerability wasn't just welcomed, but embraced. With each keystroke, Jake realized he was not simply capturing thoughts. He was creating a legacy of empowerment for both himself and others. He poured stories into his writing, tales of struggle, success, and everything in between. But in the back of his mind, the ever-present fear seemed to whisper louder now. What if this ambition, this writer within him, didn't fulfill the expectations he set for himself? What if the reception was muted, sending him spiraling back into the shadows he wished to escape? He paused, uncertainty clawing at him again, filling every crevice in his resolve. Was he truly prepared to emerge into the light, bearing his soul to the world? As his fingers hovered above the keyboard, a new dilemma formed. Was this a moment of courage, or merely a precursor to exposure? With the sun fully rising beyond the clouds, Jake felt the weight of the decision meld with the light illuminating his room. He lingered in this existential balance, knowing that, no matter how he framed his path, the moment of truth was dawning. Jake clenched his fists, enthusiasm battling with dread. As the first draft of the blog post filled the screen, he could feel the road to self-discovery growing tangible, yet the specter of vulnerability loomed larger than ever. What would he do if rejection became a reality, if doubt echoed back louder than acceptance? With that thought lingering in the air, Jake prepared to walk down the path that could either uplift him or leave him vulnerable to the storm ahead, one that would lead to an encounter with Mark that could change everything. The day carried on, and Jake sat at his desk, staring blankly at his computer screen. The cursor blinked in rhythmic impatience, yet his thoughts were tethered by a mix of fear and anticipation. He knew he needed to reach out to Mark, to share his ambitions, yet the prospect of that conversation loomed like a specter, feeding his anxieties. With a deep breath, Jake leaned back in his chair, allowing his mind to wander through a kaleidoscope of memories shared with Mark. Their late-night brainstorming sessions, laughter filled with inside jokes, the camaraderie as they pushed each other towards goals that seemed so far out of reach. It had always been a partnership founded on mutual support, but now, as he began to forge his path alone, he questioned how much of that bond remained. What would Mark think of this new venture? Would he celebrate Jake's budding ambition, or would he interpret it as another flight of fancy destined to crumble beneath the weight of reality? In the quiet of his room, the internal debate roiled like a storm, each query pulling him deeper into self-doubt. Finally, he grasped the phone, his heartbeat quickening as he thumbed through contacts until he found Mark's name. A small voice in his head urged caution. Was he ready to invite someone else into this raw, vulnerable space? Each ring echoed like a countdown. "Hey, Jake!" Mark's voice filtered through, bright and familiar. "Hey, Mark, got a minute?" Jake's words felt heavier than anticipated, but he pushed through. This had to be done. "Of course, what's up?" Mark's cheerful tone momentarily dulled the edge of Jake's anxiety. Jake hesitated, collecting his thoughts. "I've been working on something, a blog actually. It's about my journey, my experiences, and figuring out who I really am. I wanted to run it by you." "Wow, that's awesome!" Mark exclaimed, but Jake could hear the skepticism lurking just beneath the surface. "What's the focus?" Jake felt the stirrings of excitement battling his nervousness. "It's about authenticity, personal growth. I want to share the process, the ups and downs, you know? It's a bit different from what I've done before." "You mean like putting yourself out there?" Mark's inquiry hung in the air, a cautious curiosity. "Yeah," Jake admitted, a lump forming in his throat. "Vulnerability and all that. Dude, that sounds incredible. But why now?" Mark's tone shifted, probing deeper into Jake's motivation. "No one ever really talks about the struggle, the doubts." Jake's voice grew steadier, emboldened by Mark's support. "I want to document my experiences, not just for me, but for others who might be facing the same things." Silence draped over the call, stretching this moment of revelation into the unknown. Jake's pulse quickened as anticipation built. Would Mark understand? After a moment, Mark finally spoke, the weight of his words grounding Jake. "I respect that, man. But are you ready for how people might react? When you're sharing your story, it's different. You could get positive feedback, sure, but you might also face criticism." Jake could feel his breath hitch. Criticism. The very essence of his fear materialized before him. "Yeah, I know," he confessed. "But it feels like I have to take the leap. Otherwise, what's the point of all this change?" A low chuckle came through the speaker. "You've got guts, Jake. Guts I admire. If anyone can take that leap, it's you. But you know I'm here to challenge you, right? Just make sure you're prepared for the fallout." This was it. The acknowledgement of his ambition sat heavy on Jake's shoulders, feeling both like a victory and an anchor. Mark's faith in him lit a flicker of belief deep within. "Thanks, Mark. I'll keep you posted as I go along. Need your insights," Jake replied, ready to navigate the treacherous waters ahead. As they wrapped up the call, a renewed sense of purpose surged through him. Mark believed in him. That affirmation was fuel. But within the thrill of his newfound courage, doubt still whispered cruelly. What if he poured his soul into this blog, only to discover a hollow response, a bruise on his new aspirations? Jake shook his head, forcibly dispelling the creeping negative thoughts. Standing at the precipice of vulnerability, he recognized that each word he wrote, each story shared, cultivated not just a blog, but an opportunity for growth, a path to authenticity that lay just beyond the horizon. He felt the keyboard beckoning, words demanding to be freed. But the specter of pressure loomed large. What if he stumbled? What if his truths found an unwelcoming audience? With every anticipation of victory came questions that twisted his resolve. Determined to break through, he placed his fingers over the keys, ready to pour it all out. The next chapter awaited him, a blank canvas begging for color, a canvas that promised to reveal not just his journey, but the deeper layers of who he was becoming. With the twilight of uncertainty, Jake knew the time had come to confront his fears head-on. Was he truly prepared for the storm of revelation that lay ahead? He pressed enter, opening the gateway to his unfolding story, cradling the uncertainty with newfound strength. But deep within, one lingering thought persisted. What would it mean if this new freedom revealed truths he wasn't ready to accept? The clatter of keys filled the quiet room, blending with Jake's rising heartbeat as he transformed his fears into words. Each letter he typed felt like a shot in the arm, invigorating yet terrifying. The initial thrill soon gave way to an unsettling quiet as he reread his words. They shone with authenticity, yet there lingered a shadow of doubt. Was he truly prepared to lay himself bare for the world to see? Hours passed, and the glow of the screen bathed his face in blue light, a stark reminder of the journey he had embarked upon. As he worked, snippets of ideas floated in and out of his mind. He was no longer just recounting experiences, he was beginning to document lessons learned, the fractures and stitches of his growth. But alongside this, a fear slithered beneath his skin. What if his vulnerabilities were misconstrued? What if his honesty attracted scrutiny instead of support? With each post, Jake felt a drastic push towards clarity. Yet the constant dialogue in his mind oscillated between affirmation and self-sabotage. He recalled Mark's words about backlash. What if criticism became a crucible of pain instead of a road to progress? No longer just an inner conflict, this wrestle now displayed itself through his voice, the way he typed, how he constructed his sentences. It was time for Jake to confront this vulnerability head-on. Fueled by the need for an anchor, he sought solace in the community of fellow bloggers. The promise of a supportive audience hung in the air, tantalizing and terrifying in equal measure. He scrolled through social media, each click revealing stories of individuals who had also laid their souls bare. They talked of triumphs, but honesty spoke louder through their brushes with despair. Before he knew it, Jake found himself drafting a new post, one centered around a paradox he had struggled with: the fear of not being good enough versus the undeniable need to be seen. This would go beyond mere squealings of the heart. It would serve as a testimony to his evolution, a beacon for those lost in their own mazes. He felt the burn of inspiration clawing at him, and for the first time he realized this could be a discourse, an exchange, rather than a one-way street. Yet as night faded into dawn, exhaustion pressed against him like a weight. He stepped away from the screen, looking out into the creeping light of day. A question had begun to simmer internally, a raw, unrefined question. If he was willing to expose the raw edges of his personality to the world, who was he beyond that exposure? Who did he want to be when the clamor of self-doubt quieted? Jake understood that this exploration was just the beginning. It was an ongoing dialogue with himself, meant to unravel the intricacies of his identity. With renewed determination, he decided to take the first step by sharing his drafts with Mark, his sounding board, his ally in this intricate dance of authenticity. As he sent the email, he felt a pull towards the possibility of transformation, a mixture of trepidation and excitement coursing through him. But that anticipation gave way to a realization that left him reeling. Inviting Mark in would not only require revealing his work, but also the deeper layers of vulnerability he still shielded. Could he truly let someone in on this raw journey? Before he could push those thoughts away, a ping from his phone announced Mark's swift response. The words spilled into his mind, immediate and electrifying. "Can we meet up? I want to discuss how we can take your blog to the next level." Jake's stomach churned, a blend of eagerness and dread battling for dominance. This was it, the moment to leap beyond self-imposed constraints, to start shaping his narrative more actively. Yet beneath the surface loomed a trepidation that spoke of inadequacy. Could he allow his unrefined voice to flourish, or would it echo back with the cracks of his insecurities? With his heart pounding, Jake felt the tension settling deep within him. The journey ahead felt both like a calling and a daunting challenge. But one thing was certain, he was standing at the cusp of something transformative, and now it was time to leap. He took a deep breath and replied, feeling a surge of empowerment take hold. Absolutely, let's do this. What clarity awaited him in a conversation that could redefine his very essence? How would he negotiate the delicate line between vulnerability and exposure? The impending discussion lingered in the air, heavy with possibility and uncertainty. Jake could hardly sleep the night before meeting Mark. Restlessness danced in his mind, a chaotic whirl of thoughts that wouldn't settle. He caught snatches of anticipation and fear as his brain replayed possible scenarios, each sounding wilder than the last. They would discuss his blog, undoubtedly, but what if the conversation turned toward his vulnerabilities, his insecurities? Would Mark understand the burden that authenticity placed upon him? By morning, he felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation, the kind that comes just before a plunge into unknown waters. He chose his outfit carefully, a balance of casual and professional, hoping to project an image of confidence while masking his internal chaos. As he prepared, there was a tension in his gut, a reminder of the stakes he was now invested in. He was not just sharing words on a screen, he was on the verge of exposing fragments of his soul. When he arrived at the cafe, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sound of clinking cups, filling the air with a kind of comforting buzz. Jake found a table near the window and mentally rehearsed his approach, wondering how to introduce his latest blog ideas without overexposing his vulnerabilities too quickly. He fidgeted with his hands, feeling the cool surface of the table beneath his palms, grounding him momentarily in reality. Mark arrived, his demeanor relaxed, but with an eagerness Jake hadn't noticed before. They exchanged pleasantries, but the conversation quickly became focused, Mark leaning in, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "I read your drafts. They're incredible," he said, and Jake's chest tightened with a mix of pride and insecurity. "But I think we can take them further. You're touching on something raw and real, and that's where magic happens." Jake felt a swell of hope. Affirmation from Mark was like a spotlight cutting through his tangled doubts. But with it came more apprehension. "What if it's not enough?" he blurted out, unable to contain the whisper of fear that had dogged him. "What if people don't connect with me, or worse, they judge me?" Mark paused, giving Jake a contemplative look. "That's the risk of vulnerability, Jake. But you're not just exposing yourself for the sake of it. You're sharing a journey. People relate to struggle and growth. That's what makes your words powerful." A flicker of revelation ignited within Jake. It wasn't merely about getting feedback on writing. It was about a more profound exchange that could encourage personal development. They talked extensively, ideas flowed, and with each discussion point, Jake felt a tightening bond with Mark that encouraged him to open up even wider about his struggles. "Let's build a community around this," Mark suggested. "An interactive platform where readers can share their stories too. You could establish a dialogue that extends beyond your writing." Jake nodded, each word from Mark wrapping around him like a warm blanket. Yet there remained an undercurrent of fear. Could he manage this responsibility? Was he prepared for the myriad of voices that might echo back to him if he unleashed his narrative further? The time they spent together flew by, and as they stood to leave, a new weight settled on Jake, one that spoke of potential, but also of responsibility. "Let's meet again next week to brainstorm," Mark said, and Jake agreed, but internally he simmered with apprehension about the task ahead. As he walked back to his car, a contradiction of excitement and dread throbbed within him. Would he allow this prospect of growth to envelop him entirely, or would he retreat into his cocoon of safety? He flexed his fingers, feeling the pulse of opportunity, but that relentless shadow of doubt trailed closely. If he wanted to forge this path, he had to open not just the door to his blog, but also to the uncharted territories of his emotions and identity. Could he embrace this chance to transform the visceral aspects of his journey into something compelling? Before he could conclude his thoughts, Another ping from his phone demanded attention. It was an invitation to a writing workshop that specifically focused on authenticity and storytelling. The intrigue tugged at him. Could this be the next step toward unraveling his fears and fully embracing his narrative? Jake took a deep breath, heart racing. He knew he had a choice to make. Would he jump into this new opportunity, or would he hold back? Tethered by his insecurities once again? The decision loomed ahead, tinged with the promise of change. Jake's gaze was fixed on the workshop invitation that blinked at him from his phone screen. The words authenticity in storytelling pulsated with a promising allure, but they also echoed his fears. He sank into his car, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, a battleground of excitement and uncertainty brewing within. The workshop was in 2 days, and the thought of sharing his story, his vulnerabilities, felt like standing on a precipice, peering into the depths of an unknown abyss. What if he revealed too much? Yet, what if this was the key to his growth? Mark's words rattled around his mind, a suggestion for boldness layered with the warmth of community. "You're sharing a journey," he had said. Could he actually do this? Jake's internal dialogue pulsed with urgency, tearing at his resolve. A flick of the wrist brought the phone to life, fingers hovering over the RSVP button. He closed his eyes and envisioned the sensation of opening up, each word emitting a cathartic release, stripping him of the shackles his fears had held him in for far too long. Yet imagined praise was met with a quiet specter of rejection, every heartbeat echoing, "What if they don't get it?" The echoes intensified, and he imagined Mark beside him, urging him forward. But he had to muster courage from within himself. Something shifted in the hours that ticked away leading up to the workshop. He found himself jotting notes, pieces of his past spilling onto the page, thoughts racing. Moments of grief, lost opportunities, even fleeting moments of clarity. They formed the foundation of his narrative, fragments that made him the person he was today. The day of the workshop arrived, and Jake entered a large room filled with people all seeking something similar. Their faces were familiar, yet foreign, a mix of hope and apprehension mirrored in their eyes. He spotted Mark across the room, and their eyes locked, signaling solidarity. Mark nodded slightly, his presence a reminder of the supportive bond they were building. As the session began, a facilitator encouraged participants to share snippets of their stories. Jake felt a rush of adrenaline surge through him, tinged with anxiety and anticipation. When his turn came, the weight of expectation settled on his shoulders. Inhaling deeply, he spoke, unearthing elements of his life he had buried beneath layers of self-doubt and fear. "Writing has always been my refuge," he started, voice steady, though internally a storm raged. "But I often find myself paralyzed by the thought of reaching into the raw, vulnerable parts of my story." With each word, he could feel the collective energy in the room change. Heads nodded in understanding, eyes widened with recognition. He told them of his struggles, of how sharing the real Jake felt like walking a tightrope over a chasm of judgment. "But what I realized," he continued, connection building with the audience, "is that those fears, those struggles, they are the essence of my truth." As he finished, a wave of warmth rushed over him. Applause erupted, a sound he hadn't anticipated, one that echoed his realization. He was not alone, nor would he be judged for baring his soul. The experience opened a door he had only dared to peek through before. With each shared story, Jake felt pieces of his identity realigning, coursing through him like electricity. This was no longer just about a blog. It was a movement toward embracing authenticity in his narrative journey, a bridge to others who walked similar paths. But as applause faded, doubt crept back in, subtle yet insistent. Could he sustain this momentum? Would he still feel this empowered when he sat down to write again? When the community aspect of storytelling would undoubtedly challenge him, with critiques and rival voices? Jake stepped back from the event, the exhilaration tempered by doubt's familiar grip. There was still much to grapple with, and the true test of his growth was yet to come. Would he continue to risk, to engage deeply with his own narrative, or would he retreat again to self-imposed barriers of safety? As he left, he spotted Mark waiting for him, eyes alight with encouragement. "You were amazing," Mark said, clasping Jake's shoulder firmly. "This is just the beginning. Let's plan our next steps." Jake took in a shaky breath. It felt like everything had shifted, yet the battle within seemed far from over. How deeply could he delve into this narrative beyond the workshop? Would he seize this opportunity to expand his voice and confront those lingering fears head-on? The invitation to grow loomed large, but so did the fear of failing to meet the new expectations he'd stirred. Jake caught Mark's eye, his heart thudding. It was time to chart the course forward, filled with both potential and uncertainty. The workshop had opened a portal, but Jake knew he had choices to make. What would happen when he stepped through it completely? The very thought sent tremors of anxiety and exhilaration cascading through him as he prepared for the next bold leap in his narrative journey. As days passed since the workshop, Jake found himself standing at a crossroads of transformation. The decision to embark on his blogging venture felt like both liberation and weighty responsibility. He had exchanged fragments of his soul in the safe haven of that room, yet facing a larger audience brought a new layer of complexity. Determined to maintain the momentum gained from the workshop, he returned to his computer, fingers hovering above the keyboard. The starkness of the blank page loomed large, filled with potential but also shadows of vulnerability. Jake inhaled deeply, reminding himself that this was an opportunity to share not just his journey, but the acquired wisdom that now radiated within him. Days of wrestling with doubt melted away slowly, reshaping into purpose. Driven by the voices that had resonated during the workshop, Jake began drafting a series of posts focused on authenticity and personal growth. Each word crystallized bits of his experience, illustrating not merely his struggles, but the triumphs that accompanied them. As he crafted his narrative, the layers of his old identity unraveled further. He wrote candidly about evenings of self-doubt and the small victories that had started to map a new trajectory. Jake felt empowered by reframing his narrative. No longer would he merely recount tales of struggle, but rather he shared how those experiences shaped resilience and grit. Sharing this iterative process, which transitioned from fear-laden hesitancy to a celebration of authentic existence, invited a deeper reflection. Jake began to see himself not just as a participant in the journey of self-improvement, but as an architect, constructing a legacy that intertwined vulnerability and strength. This newfound clarity bubbled over when he noticed a shift in his interactions with both Mark and his growing community. Mark was no longer just an ally, he became a collaborator. They brainstormed ideas dynamically, planning ambitious projects like live discussions and guest posts from readers who were eager to join the dialogue. With every meeting, Jake's confidence flourished, fueled by shared creativity. There was something transformative about bouncing ideas, each conversation layering new potential on the foundation of their friendship. The doubt that once loomed overhead like a storm cloud dissipated, replaced by a vibrant optimism illuminated by solidarity and collaboration. Finally, the day arrived for him to hit publish on his first formal post to his blog. A piece that entwined the essence of authenticity with an invitation for readers to engage with their own narratives. No longer an echo of personal fear, Jake's writing now resonated with a conviction that was palpable. As he pressed publish, a flurry of emotions rushed through him: pride, excitement, and an echo of trepidation. Would they resonate with him? Would they understand his journey as he intended? To his astonishment, the responses poured in, and with them, recognition of the shared human experience. Comments flooded his dashboard. Stories of similar struggles, tales of optimism, and pledges to embrace vulnerability in their own lives began to accumulate. One message in particular stood out. A reader named Emma recounted her battle with self-doubt and how Jake's words inspired her to take that first step toward her own aspirations. The warm weight of her gratitude filled him with joy, solidifying a new belief in himself. He wasn't just a storyteller, he was a catalyst for change. Overwhelmed by this wave of encouragement, Jake realized he had accomplished something profound. He had transformed his once narrow understanding of identity into a tapestry woven from the threads of authenticity, courage, connection, and purpose. He was not merely reflecting his story, but offering others a glimpse into their own potential for growth. Staring at the accumulating comments, Jake recognized a truth. Resilience flourishes in community, and authenticity is a bridge that connects us all. The lessons his grandfather imparted thrummed in his heart. He had taken ownership of his journey, not just in the commitment to foster conversations that could uplift others. He was no longer just Jake, the boy chained by the weight of expectations. He had forged his own identity, a leader, a storyteller, a friend. With each interaction, his confidence solidified, and where once doubt had rooted deep, now blossomed an unequivocal assurance. It was clear now. This path of honesty, vulnerability, and engagement would define his future. He had taken every step forward with intention, and the empowering transformation resonated through him. As he prepared for the next blog post, he smiled, knowing he had conquered not just the art of storytelling, but the significance of authentic connection, a gift that could extend beyond him, illuminating the way for others to walk in freedom and purpose. In that moment, Jake felt satisfied and fulfilled, grounded in the meaning derived from this personal metamorphosis. He had proven to himself that embracing vulnerability wasn't merely a courageous act, but an authentic invitation for connection, rooted in the shared experiences that bind us to one another. With this newfound realization, Jake tightened the anchor of his purpose, ready to face whatever awaited him on this remarkable journey of storytelling, a journey that had only just begun. Now, this is your time to engage. You need to subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. This is the moment to show your support. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and let your voice be heard. We want to know. Comment below your reactions and theories about Jake's transformation. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Together, let's foster a movement of authenticity.